Welcome back to part 2 of Coming Home and the Israel Inspiration Initiative. If the Torah, the Nevi'im, Chazal, and our daily prayers all place Eretz Yisrael at the center of Jewish destiny, the next question becomes, why should a Jew living in America today seriously consider Aliyah as part of their plans? Aliyah is not primarily a political issue or a lifestyle decision. It is one of the greatest recurring themes in Tanakh and in Jewish history. But Aliyah is very personal. It's a very complex equation. It's not 1 and plus 1 equals 2. It's a multifaceted algorithm for each person that has a different set of variables that need to be understood before you make that decision. So at this point, what I'd like to do is kind of share with you this book, Coming Home. I'm not going to go through all 101 reasons, but I've selected 10 reasons that are representative of the reasons in this book of why should one consider planning to Make Aliyah sometime in your future. So I got a question recently that if Aliyah is so important, why do you write a book about 101 reasons? Wouldn't one reason be good enough? I think the answer is simple. Different reasons speak to different people. Not everyone is motivated by the same thing. Some people are motivated by Torah. Some people are motivated by family, by community, by opportunity, by purpose, and some by Jewish destiny. So I organized this book into 10 sections, representing 10 different lines of thought. And what I like to do is not only mention 10, but I like to read to you some chapters. So let me start with the introduction. For generations, the Jewish people spoke of the return in language of prayer, longing, and hope. It was present in daily tefillah, woven into the words of the Siddur, and repeated year after year at the Seder, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Over the centuries of exile, this idea was not merely symbolic. It was carried as a lived expectation, even when its realization seemed distant. In our time, that reality has changed. The possibility of return is no longer theoretical. Jewish sovereignty has been restored. Hebrew has been revived as a spoken language. Jewish life, religious, cultural, and national, has taken root in the land of Israel in ways that early generations could scarcely have imagined. And yet, for many Jews, Aliyah remains an abstract idea. It is often framed as a personal lifestyle decision, something optional, individual, and detached from the deeper rhythms of Jewish history and responsibility. This book begins with a different premise. Aliyah is not a departure from Jewish life that has been lived for centuries. It is in many ways a natural continuation made newly possible in history. So the first category that I focused in on are spiritual and religious reasons. And what I like to do is share with you reason number 2, being part of Jewish destiny. For centuries, Jews prayed for the return not as poetry, but as a promise. Prophetic texts describe the ingathering exiles as an integral part of Jewish destiny, without defining its precise pace or final form. Aliyah can be understood as participation in that unfolding process, joining the ongoing ingathering of Am Yisrael and actively contributing to rebuilding of Jewish life in its ancestral land. And a pasuk that I selected, V'shav Hashem Elokecha eshuvuscha v'haviecha el haaretz. Hashem will restore your captivity, and He will bring you to the land. We find this in Devarim, Perek Lamed. And why did I select this as the first one to describe to you? Because this really connects Torah, Nevi'im, Chazal, and modern history. The second one is around national and collective reasons. And the reason that I selected was reason number 12. Becoming part of Jewish history. For years, Jews dreamed about participating in Jewish history. Now we can. For centuries, Jews expressed longing for return through prayer and ritual. Living in Israel allows that longing to move from memory to participation. Aliyah situates a Jew not only as a bearer of Jewish history, but as an active participant in its unfolding. V'aviyecha Hashem Elokecha el Eretz Heitivcha b'hirpucha. Hashem will bring you to the land, and He will do good to you and multiply you. Devarim, Perik Lamed, Pasuk Hey. Third category is cultural and community. And here I select the reason 21. Jewish holidays as public holidays. Let me ask each one of you, how many times people had to go to their bosses on Rosh Hashanah to ask them that they can take off, explaining it's the Jewish New Year? And of course your boss is going to say yes. But then you say, oh, by the way, 2 weeks later, I have another holiday called Sukkot, and I won't be able to come to work for 2 days. And he kind of shakes his head, oh, okay, if you can't come, I'm sure you'll make up the work. Oh, and by the way, in between Sukkot and Rosh Hashanah, there may be a holiday called Yom Kippur that I have to take off. And 2 days after Sukkot, there's another holiday that I need to take off called Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. Well, in Eretz Yisrael, the entire country is preparing for Yontif, and no explanation is required. In Israel, the nation itself moves with the Jewish calendar. Schools close, businesses adjust, public transportation slows or stops, and the atmosphere shifts. Chagim are not confined to private spaces. They're reflected in the shared public rhythm. This alignment allows Jewish holidays to be experienced not only as personal observance, but as collective Jewish time. One of the things that always impressed me, after Rosh Hashanah, right before Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh Elul, you start seeing foods for Rosh Hashanah. After Rosh Hashanah, you see the foods for Sukkot in the supermarkets. After Sukkot, soon as after Simchas Torah, the Sufganiyot come out, and it's time to start thinking about celebrating Hanukkah. After Hanukkah, we start thinking about celebrating Tu B'Shvat. And after Tu B'Shvat, we talk about celebrating Purim. And after Purim, we start celebrating Pesach. And after Pesach, it's Shavuos. The national calendar defines what we are doing, what we are eating, and where we are going throughout the year. The next chapter is about family and lifestyle. And we all know that environment shapes identity. And we know that children absorb Judaism naturally. And when you're in an environment that is completely Jewish, your children's identity will be shaped. So let me read to you a narrative that I created. Yehuda and Rivka sat in their small New York apartment watching their children play. Their eldest had once again been asked why he couldn't eat the pizza at a classmate's birthday party. Their daughter had begun using an easier version of her name, not out of rejection, but out of fatigue. They were deeply committed to raising Jewish children. Their home was warm, observant, and intentional. And yet they felt the quiet strain of constantly explaining, translating, and defending Jewish difference. They began to wonder whether effort alone was enough, or whether environment mattered more than they assumed it did. The Torah frames Jewish continuity as something lived through the day. Uv'shavta v'kumecha, v'shinantim levonecha, v'yidarta bam, v'shitu v'esecha, u'letecha b'derech. The next section is about economic and career. Not because people make Aliyah for money, because many people assume I can never make a living in Eretz Yisrael. And that is not true at all. There are so many job opportunities. Nefesh B'Nefesh has worked very hard to make sure that people's licenses in the United States are transferable to Eretz Yisrael. And they've been very successful in doing that. I'm sure everyone here has read about Startup Nation. This is very true. Not only has it been Startup Nation, but is now Scale Up Nation, where companies in Israel are looking to build scalable companies that would serve the entire world. So finding a job in Eretz Yisrael is not something that is hard to do. If you do the right planning and make the right contacts, you will be very successful in your job in Eretz Yisrael. The next section is about security, and this section really focuses in on the fact that in Eretz Yisrael, it is Jews who are protecting Jews. For 2,000 years, Jews relied on others for protection: kings, presidents, mayors. While protection is mostly granted, it is not assumed. But today, in Eretz Yisrael, that posture is fundamentally different. The state security institutions exist for many reasons, but one of them is unmistakable and foundational: the protection of Jewish life as a national obligation. That obligation is built into policy, reflex, and public consciousness. This is not a claim of perfection. It is a claim of ownership. Jewish safety is not delegated to others. It is taken seriously as our responsibility. As Gemara Shvuah says in Perek Lamed Tet, Kol Yisrael Arevin Zeh Bozeh. The next section, section 7, is about the beautiful geography that exists in Eretz Yisrael. It is a truly beautiful country. From the mountains in the north to the deserts in the south, to the richness in Yehuda and Shomron, to the rivers of the Yarden, to the Mediterranean Sea. When you hike the Judean hills, and you visit Hebron or Shiloh or Beit El or the Kinneret Yerushalayim, you're walking through the landscape of Tanakh. It's not a museum. It's a living country. Let me just share with you a story that happened to me this past Yom Yerushalayim. I went on a tour with the OU, and they took us through the old city. The tour guide knew that I was a Kohen. And he said, Paul, why don't you just stand on this rock? So I said, okay. I had no idea. I must have passed this rock probably hundreds of times walking to the Kotel. It was in the Jewish Quarter, right where the golden menorah is now standing. And he brought people around and he said, take a look at this rock where Paul is standing. That is the foundation of the bridge that connected the Kohanim that lived in this neighborhood to the Harabayas. This is how they went up to do the Avodah. Tears came to my eyes. I knew that my ancestors, at one point in time, walked up that bridge to do the Avodah for Bnei Yisrael. Medical and social, the next section in my book. Many Americans assume that Israelis must be a very unhappy people because life is so difficult. There are so many wars where Israel has to defend its own existence. Yet year after year, Israel ranks among the happiest countries in the world. Ezehu Ashir, Hasomek Bechalko, as it says in Pirkei Avos, Perek Daled. Perhaps happiness doesn't only come from comfort. Perhaps it comes from meaning. Israelis live with purpose, family, community, identity, and belonging. In a most recent survey, the segment of the Israeli population, the men and women between 20 and 30 who are protecting us, were ranked number 2 in the world in happiness, something you would not expect. The next chapter is around personal growth. And what I'd like to share with you is a personal story about myself. I had a wonderful working career in the United States, working for high-tech companies like Bell Laboratories and Bell Communications Research, and eventually becoming a CTO at IBM. Then came one day, my boss came to me and said, I have an opportunity for you. And you know, when your boss says you have an opportunity, you need to watch out. And he said, Paul, unfortunately, we're doing some reorganization, and your organization will have to be moved to a different part of the world. And the opportunity is for you to work in a laboratory either in Brazil or China or India. And we'd like you to accept that position. So I thought for about a second. I said, this must be a sign from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it's time for me to change the direction of my life. And I said, and what happens if I don't take this opportunity? Well, we'll have to give you a package. I said, well, prepare the package. I'm not going to take this opportunity. 2 days later, I get a phone call from the Israeli consulate in New York. And they said, I heard you're retiring. I said, well, how'd you hear that? And she didn't give me an answer. But I have an opportunity for you. And maybe this is really a good opportunity as opposed to the other one. We're looking for someone to help us facilitate for the startups in Eretz Yisrael to make contacts with U.S. companies, either for partnerships or investments, as well as help us at a global conference, the Global World Wireless Congress, and to bring people to meet these companies. And I did that for 3 years, meeting many Israeli startups and companies and helping them make connections with either investors and or partnerships. So many people who say Aliyah doesn't really change only where I lived, but it changed who I became. And in fact, that's exactly what happened to me. And let me share with you kind of the last 2 reasons before we end this segment. As I mentioned before, I'm a Kohen. And as a Kohen in Eretz Yisrael, I have the opportunity to be a conduit of almost 500 brachas from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Klal Yisrael. Here in Chutz La'aretz, I only had the opportunity to do that 13 times. So not only is it an opportunity for me as a Kohen, but it's an opportunity for all of you to be recipients of that bracha from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every day, 2 times on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and 3 times on Yom Kippur, you have the opportunity to get a bracha from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in fact, many Gedolim, when they come from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, they ask a Kohen in their Kehillah to have them in mind specifically when they do Birkas Kohanim. And in fact, Rav Chaim Kanievsky Zal, when people came to him for a bracha, he very regularly would ask, did you daven today? And in almost all cases they would say yes. Well, you got the most powerful bracha that I can ever give you. You got the bracha of Birkas Kohanim. The last reason I just want to share with you, and I'm going to read from the book, is reason 101. Not that it's a mitzvah, even though it is a mitzvah, as mentioned by the Ramban, and 43% of the mitzvahs listed in the Rambam's Taryag mitzvos have to do with Eretz Yisrael. It's not about economics, even though the Israeli economy has been doing unbelievably during its last 3 years. Their stock market more than doubled. It's not about security. As we know, the IDF and the police protect Bnei Yisrael. But as Rav Yehuda Halevi says, Libi b'mizrach v'anochi b'sof ma'arav. And let me just read to you a short portion of reason number 101. Because it is home, where every Jew belongs, not because it's perfect, not because it's easy, but because it is ours. For over 2,000 years, the Jewish people carried Israel through prayer, law, and longing. The return was never only political, it was a people returned to its place. Israel is one place where Jewish belonging is not conditional, it is not requested, it is assumed, and that's what home means. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of family. Not escape from responsibility, but the place where responsibility is natural. Aliyah is not a judgment of those who remain elsewhere. It is a return to land, to people, to destiny. And for many, it's simply coming home. Vishavu banim ligvulam, ne'um Hashem, as we find it in Miyahu, and the children shall return to their border, declares Hashem. The question our grandparents faced was whether it's possible. The question our generation faces is whether we will answer that call. Thank you for the second podcast around Coming Home, 101 Reasons to Make Aliyah. The next podcast, we will discuss the barriers of Aliyah and some strategies of how we can overcome those barriers.